we are live. The channel is Murphy Media. I'm your host, Michael. We are joined today by the indomitable Ron Carter. Ron is a friend of the channel. Ron is a volunteer that is heading off to Ukraine quite quickly. So Ron, if you want to dive in, what has been going on in your world?
Hey, buddy. So I'm a volunteer that has now had the opportunity to do more than just a little bit of time in Ukraine. I've been to Ukraine on 4 different trips. The most recent was in October. Now I've been able to secure a personal leave of absence from my employment, and I'll be working with Atlas Global Aid for 6 months, June through November.
Outstanding. And how has do you want to detail the preparation a little bit? What you've been working on? I did see a picture the other day that you were doing some fundraising, and you didn't look that thrilled about
it. Yeah. Okay. So that one was a funny one. The picture that you're referring to, I think it was that was in September of last year, and I was just reminiscing through some of my some of the photos that I had taken, but that one came up as a part of me. Had a birthday yesterday, and Instagram already likes to make you share stories and whatnot. So in my birthday memories, recounting the last year of life, that was one of the pictures that came up. And I got to tell you, fundraising is very ridiculously difficult. Early on through the Russian invasion, it was much easier. There was so much more support, throughout the United States for people that were just horrified that this could be taking place today. And about the time that we got to the summer last year, that support had largely just waned. In fact, I had a friend of mine before I took that picture tell me that she thought that the war had already finished, like it was over. So it was strange when I got to trying to personally fundraise last year. I mean, it was brutal. It was almost like I would rather be shot at than have to stand on a corner and, tell everybody that I'm going back to Ukraine and I want to, help Ukrainians. It became such a political thing that, it wasn't even worth my time to look for donations in that manner. Currently, I'm helping Atlas Global Aid with a fundraiser that is in memory of one of our friends who died in Bakhmut. His name is Greg. He was a Canadian volunteer in Ukraine, had family in Ukraine, and became a combat medic, a really good combat medic too. He was phenomenal. Greg on Instagram, his call sign or his handle on Instagram was Wandering Hedgehog. Really, really just a wonderful, sweet individual. And of course he died over the winter. And one of the things that he did was create as many individual first aid kits as possible to give out to as many Ukrainians as possible. And so we're trying to honor his memory by doing the same. We've got a goal of $25,000 that's necessary to purchase all the components. And beyond making those individual first aid kits, I'll be working with Atlas hopefully very soon, the very first bit of the very first part of June, to provide training along with those individual first aid kit donations.
That's a fantastic mission. And of course, a tragedy. Any loss of life is a tragedy. And this war has taken some of a country's best and brightest, and certainly has marred the volunteer community that have decided to put life and limb on the line. So we wish you luck with that, and Atlas Global Aid also. That's a noble mission. And as I've detailed in all the interviews I've done with these volunteers, I think when the account of this is written, people are going to look back at the people that gave up their daily lives and their fortunes to go do this, and your name will certainly be among them. You've been putting out some great content talking about the IFAKS, detailing what they are, and this is an important component of this war. There's a lot of fundraising that's focused around this. Your group, yourself, others are doing this. Can you detail what an IFAK is for the novice folks out there that may not have that in their repertoire, I guess I would say, in their vocabulary, and walk us through the importance of those for soldiers, volunteers, people on the front line they're serving.
Absolutely. So many people think of the individual first aid kit as being, a bunch of Band-Aids that they got in a little package from Walmart. And unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about whatsoever. In fact, this all comes as a result of the creation of tactical combat casualty care. That started in 1996 through Special Operations, you know, Army and all this stuff. These guys, really wanted to be the tip of the spear, right? So 1996 was when the medicine for battlefield injuries really went through the roof. I mean, obviously there was combat medics throughout history and really good ones too. However, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Committee sought to refine how they were administering care on the battlefield. And so that's when it started, 1996. And it's a committee made up of doctors, Army doctors, and some really amazing physicians. And so they'll go through and make recommendations not only on how to provide care, but what components are the best, or at least what they recommend to be in an individual first aid kit. Now they go much further than simply point of injury care. They'll go into combat medics. In fact, the U.S. Army Rangers has a wonderful book that you could purchase detailing the special operations medicine. That's available on Amazon. But you can go and get the TCCC handbook straight off the internet for free. It's really interesting. And one of the things that they found, especially after the September 11th, 2001, was so many deaths that occurred on the battlefield were absolutely preventable. Upwards of 90% of those deaths were a result of bleeding to death, a massive hemorrhage. And so that was one of the things that the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Committee wanted to address fully with a different acronym. Today, we don't necessarily call it as much an acronym because there's so much more to it. A lot of instructors will refer to this acronym as an algorithm. And it's MARCH, by the way, MARCH. The M, the very first letter of that, is managing the massive hemorrhage. We want to stop the bleed. Bleed doesn't belong gushing out of you. It belongs in your body. So the individual first aid kit is first and foremost a kit that has tourniquets and combat gauze. For tourniquets are going to apply on your limbs and stopping the bleed by the administration of a tourniquet above the injury. High and tight is what the Army has historically taught. However, there's some other teachings, perhaps a bit more relevant today. Now, combat gauze is another one. If you may remember, in some of the Vietnam War movies, we always liked Vietnam War movies, and like Forrest Gump comes to mind, where something jumped up and bit me, right? When we have injuries like that in the Vietnam conflict, and even up until Desert Storm is when we finally started to move away from the powder that was administered to cauterize the bleed. That was found to be hardly useful in many cases. In fact, it did so much tissue damage that it became rather irrelevant quickly based upon gauze that had a hemostatic agent applied with it, so that the gauze would clot the blood and stop the bleed so much more effectively. So tourniquets and combat gauze are two of the very first components of the individual first aid kit. Now, I mentioned MARCH. MARCH stands for managing the massive hemorrhage, airway, that's our A, respiration, how our lungs are working. Respiration is the R. C is circulation, that heart. Obviously CPR is something that a lot of people think about when they think about first aid, and that's where we finally kind of get to the CPR in circulation of the MARCH algorithm. H is the final, and what many people don't know is that hypothermia is a killer on the battlefield. And it's not just in winter. It could be an 80-degree day, and if you've lost a lot of blood, you can go into hypothermia and just die from hypothermia. It's something that's so preventable. Getting a blanket on somebody. We use the space blankets in our individual first aid kit. Space blankets are that aluminum, really compact, really small blanket, but holy smokes, that does a wonderful job of keeping our casualties warm and preventing them from going into hypothermia. Now, the H also stands for a different H. You have two different H's. One of the reasons why they call it an algorithm versus an acronym. The H also stands for head injury. So head injury hypothermia. That head injury is something that a lot of people used to really go crazy about. Like, for example, in the NFL, with football, American football, you'd see guys that had maybe a concussion or something, like they're incapacitated, unconscious on the ground, and there would be so much care that was given to the neck, the head and neck, and it's very important because the cervical spine injuries are something to very much worry about. But on the battlefield, we can't be worrying about that if they're bleeding to death. We can't be worrying about that if they have an obstructed airway. We can't, worry about that C-spine injury if they have tension pneumothorax in their chest cavity and they're suffocating because there's air that's in between their lungs and their chest cavity. It can't expand. So the March algorithm is made by the Committee for Tactical Combat Casualty Care in order to treat battlefield victims from in the order of what would kill them the fastest to what would kill them the slowest. And obviously that's something that I really like to teach, but that's also something that I really like to practice too. How good am I at taking out of my individual first aid kit, my tourniquet, and applying it on myself, self-application. That could be very necessary. And also within the training of tactical combat casualty care are the phases of care. You have care under fire. I'm being shot at. We're all being shot at. And how would I be able to treat a victim if we're under that firefight? And of course, you have, an indirect threat afterwards. You're not being shot at anymore, but that threat could reemerge. So care under fire is the very first, but that secondary care is very necessary for you to be able to maintain situational awareness and scene security. And evacuation is that final phase of care. How we're going to evacuate that victim to the next level of care. There's a lot of training that goes along with it. And there's also a lot of Ukraine specific considerations that go into that. But man, I love teaching it. I love discussing it, and I love helping people save lives.
It is very evident that you have a very intense passion for it, and that's why we love having you on the channel. So we have seen reports early on, and this is where I want to kind of draw the distinction. Now, not to say that as defined as you have laid this out to be, from what the Ukrainians are going to be able to employ by volunteers such as yourself, other volunteer organizations, the Ukrainian army, the donations coming in from Western countries. But we've seen reports where Russian troops, and I don't know how much you'll be able to speak to this, Russian troops are being encouraged to bring their own kit. We've seen things such as feminine hygiene products being used for wound stop. Now, I have seen where that is effective, probably not the most effective, but where they're being encouraged to bring these items from their homes, possibly to be reimbursed later. So having that concerted effort being made by volunteers such as yourself, Western nations, Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc nations that are rushing this equipment in, and Russia stands alone. Can you talk about the difference that will make on the battlefield? You had mentioned 90% casualties that could have been avoided by people just simply bleeding to death. Does that play into the inflated number of casualties that we're seeing with the Russians, and how will that translate on the battlefield?
Man, that's a really fantastic question, and there's so many different facets and to answer that. Perhaps the idea of doctrine, Western doctrine versus Eastern doctrine. When I say Eastern doctrine, we always think of the Soviet Union, mass employment of men, the Chinese, similar thing. Yeah, it's really interesting how you look at the Eastern doctrine, and they really don't give much of a care of their soldiers. They really don't. Whereas with Western armies, there's so much care that's gone into not only their training, but their equipment and so on. And you're absolutely right. Tampons have been suggested to be taken to the battlefield. And by the way, I encourage all the Russians to do this because I got to tell you, I don't know too many tampons that have saved lives. In fact, I know far more people who have bled to death as a result of trying to use a tampon to stop a bleed. And by the way, those tampons are meant to draw blood out. They are not meant to keep blood in. So kind of an interesting thing. And by the way, that is a bit of mythology. If you do have any friends that have their own first aid kit and they want to stop a bleed with a tampon, throw that stuff in the garbage. It is hot garbage for plugging a gunshot hole in a person, or those fountains of blood from an amputation. If your arm's gone, that tampon is not doing anything, and that patient will die. So make sure you have good gear. With Russians, I don't care about them having good gear, and I'm joking, of course, slightly, but you're right. It is rather amazing just how poorly equipped the Russian soldiers are. There was even several videos about this time last year of Russians who had combat application tourniquets, good tourniquets, but they were zip tied to their gear. You could not pull the thing off if you wanted to. The average human has 5 liters of blood in their body, and losing more than 2, you go into irreversible hemorrhagic shock. And you can lose that 2 liters of blood in under 2 minutes. And those massive hemorrhages from arterial bleeds. So if I'm struggling to get the tourniquet into the where it's needed, I've got to do it fast. And that zip tie, my gosh, maybe that led to the deaths of several Russian conscripts, or maybe even professional soldiers. Who knows? But goodness gracious. The amount of casualties that Russia has suffered has been absolutely enormous. We're just about at the estimated 200,000 casualties for Russia, and those numbers vary. And also, what we talk about when we talk about casualties is different as well. The Ukrainian Army and Ministry of Defense, I should say, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense lists their estimates on deaths of Russians, but simply dying doesn't mean that everybody that's not dead is still in the fight. In fact, you have those battlefield casualties. They can't fight anymore, but they're still alive. So those casualties, those injured persons who can no longer fight, are often included within, like, for example, the British Ministry of Defense and how they estimate casualties. So there's different terminologies there, but we're probably around 200,000. By the end of summer, we'll easily be at 250,000 Russians having died in Ukraine. That's unthinkable. And my goodness, it's so shocking to me to think about, because in the 10 years, no, correction, in the entirety of time that the United States was involved in Iraq and Afghanistan post September 11th, I believe our casualties were around 14,000 deaths. 14,000 deaths. 14,000 deaths is something that Russia is doing, weekly. So, sometimes even in just a few days. So it's an amazing amount of people dying, and that's horrible, of course. But if I'm the defender, I want to make sure every aggressor dies. That's how Ukraine unfortunately survives, and there's no better medicine on the battlefield than fire superiority, and that's exactly what I hope that Ukraine is able to pull off within the next few months, going into summer and going into their much anticipated counteroffensive.
That was the absolute perfect segue into the next subject. And then I want to get into your itinerary. When my fiance and I travel as tourists, we have a well-planned itinerary. So I got to find out what it is you're going to be doing. The upcoming counteroffensive, we have a lot of volunteers that say they're getting ready to go back over, and they are taking a ton of kit. They're taking a ton of gear, and it seems to all be culminating at this point for a lot of volunteers. This has been talked about. Rasputitsa, the muddy season is almost over, and we're seeing massive amounts of equipment, a lot of troops on the march, and we're seeing all of this happen. Did that play a role in you deciding to head back over at this time? Was it fate? And what kind of, obviously IFAKS, that's been the subject of conversation. What kind of gear have you marshaled together and are taking over?
Great questions, man. All right. So was it fate? Yeah, I suppose it is fate that I would be able to work with Atlas Global Aid through as long as I can. These 6 months I've been given a leave of absence from my work. And my particular employer is not known for granting leaves of absences in this situation. volunteering for maybe a month, something like that. That's more common. But this is a very long amount of leave. So maybe it is a bit of fate, or maybe it's just my employer realizing that I've been able to do a few good things, and so hopefully that I can continue doing that with Atlas. I really wanted to be there much earlier. The last time that I was there was October, so there's been quite a bit of change since October, and so many, like you said, so many Ukrainian service members have received training, both in the United States and Germany and the UK, and now they're back in Ukraine. This is open source. I'm not sharing anything that the Ruskies could use. In fact, I think it's been rather interesting recently that I've seen several Ukrainian service members publicly share that they are on the move, and this, in many cases, would be a violation of operational security, and that's been one of the things that we always say, like, shh, we didn't see anything. We didn't see these tanks. We didn't see these infantry fighting vehicles, and now these things are becoming a bit more public. I think that is something of a psychological play that the Ukrainians are doing, because the Russians are scared. If you look at their May Day parade today in Moscow, it was a sad sight. They didn't have a single aircraft flying, and the tank that they had, highlighted in this parade, was ironically made in Kharkiv. So it's a Ukrainian tank, technically. Just kind of funny, but the psyche of the Russians currently has to be fear. And we've seen Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the mercenary group Wagner. One of my friends refuses to call him Wagner. He always calls them wankers. That's a funny story for you. But they've been one of the primary assault groups on Bakhmut, and they've failed. They failed tremendously. And there's obviously quite a bit of fear for them. So now that we have the Ukrainians with the initiative, right? They truly have the initiative. They're going to attack when they want to attack, where they want to attack, with an amazing assault force attacking. So clearly, the Russians are scared is probably the wrong word. In most cases, I'd say they're terrified, or they should be if they're not. So I think it is perhaps fate that I was so lucky to be able to go now when I'm going. And I think we're all hoping for that knockout blow, that amazing. The United States and Americans, we were exceptionally spoiled with storming Norman Schwarzkopf in 1991 through Operation Desert Storm, where that maneuver, those tanks, just sweeping in to not only liberate Kuwait but also to plunge very deep into Iraq. That was a war that was almost instantaneously ours. We had the initiative, on the first shot that was fired, and that was just this overwhelming power that really stopped Saddam Hussein in 1991. And we're all hoping for that today. And I think the Ukrainians honestly possess the ability, but this is not a war that is over and done with. There's nothing that says, should Ukraine push out every Russian from every bit of land, that Russia somehow stops. And as a result of that, as a result of our not knowing, and through history, looking at the first and second Chechen wars, that Russia, they spent a decade really fighting in Chechnya and Grozny. Maybe that is Ukraine too. Maybe they're able to do really good work now, but that attrition continues for a decade. That's very possible, unfortunately. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very happy to stay, not only for the duration that I am, but to continue volunteering, because it's a long game. It's a marathon, and you never win a marathon by sprinting the first mile as hard as you can.
And it certainly seems the goal of the Ukrainian command staff has been to drag Russia into deep water, tie them, fix them to certain locations, and for lack of a better terminology, let them bleed. So what they've been able to do in the East while preparing for this counteroffensive has been nothing short of amazing. So To pause for station identification, this is Murphy Media. We're joined again by Ron Carter. And Ron, you're going back to Ukraine. As I mentioned, when Nikki and I travel somewhere, she is the itinerary boss. She sets the travel plan. She lets me know when and where to be, and I carry the bags. So this is going to require some intricate planning. You've got a game plan going in to the degree that you're able without spoiling any personal security or anything you may want to keep off the record. What is this next visit going to look like for you?
Great question. So, yeah, every time that I've been over, it's been a little bit different for me. Not only with the contents that I'm carrying, but what I'm going to do. June 1st is my launch date. I'm hoping to be catching flights through Polish Lot Airlines out of Chicago to Warsaw on June 1st. So hopefully being at least very close to Ukraine by June 2nd. Now, there is quite a bit of considerations with what I'm bringing, how I'm bringing it. Obviously, I'm bringing my own personal donations and a lot of my own kit. Thankfully, I have a lot of my kit that's already with our team. It gets really difficult to lug around plates, armor plates, your plate carrier plates, and it's heavy too. So with airlines, if you're checking that, well, that's a considerable amount of weight. And so I've been lucky enough to store so much of my weight in country with my friends with Atlas Global Aid. So I'll be able to suit up just as I really enter the country. Now, as far as the actual flights, they are not necessarily determined by what I want. And one of the things that perhaps that a lot of people don't know about me is I work for an airline. And the reason I've been able to make so many trips to Ukraine is because I'm using my flight benefits to go there and come back. Now, I save a lot of money. And obviously this is something that is exceptionally necessary. The average ticket to Warsaw from Chicago is something like, $1,200, $1,300. Mileage may vary, and you could probably get there a bit cheaper through, going like to Frankfurt and catching a train. I've had several friends do that. They fly into Frankfurt and they catch a train. That becomes a little more problematic with what you're carrying. So many of those nations prohibit certain items, some less than others. Poland is exceptionally hospitable when it comes to so many bits of equipment, like, for example, optics. And when I say optics, I'm not merely referring to binoculars, but also the optics that would go on top of a rifle or some weapon system. So Poland is exceptionally good in that respect, and so that's one of the reasons why I like to go to Poland direct, but also because it is the path of least resistance and the fastest route from Warsaw to the border is 3.5, 4 hours of driving. You can do it by train. You can also do it by bus. I've done the bus, but I've driven so much of the time, and it does look like I'll be able to link up with my team in Warsaw and perhaps even convoy with them to our facilities so that we're able to carry the most amount of gear on my arrival. Yeah, just making sure that we can knock out as many birds with one stone as possible, and that's what it's always been for me. It's the coordination is more often than not luck of the draw. In April of last year, I was able to carry 14 bags. 14 bags by yourself in the airport is pretty hilarious, and I pulled it off, thankfully, and I pulled it off with the help of the Sunflower Alliance out of Chicago. They're a nonprofit that's been shipping so many things over, and they were so wonderful to work with. Hopefully, I'll get to work with them again soon. And of course, hopefully I'll be able to secure more donations. I do have a friend of mine that's a prior service Army in the United States, and he has some gear that he's lending me. He was very quick to say, "Okay, this is my helmet, but you can use it." So, I'll have at least a decent helmet. And by the way, I've had decent helmets in the past, but I've made it kind of a priority. Like if I'm leaving Ukraine, that anything that I'm not going to use in the United States stays there. And so I've lost a couple of helmets now. So yeah, I'll have a new helmet and a bit of new gear. My plate carrier and stuff, though, that's what I'm really comfortable with. That is not going away anytime soon, but I might have to upgrade it based upon some of our operational concerns.
That is excellent. And will there be individuals that you will be probably nameless for security purposes, will there be certain individuals that will be participating in upcoming operations that you'll be looking at and or looking to visit, excuse me. And as far as fundraising goes, I would like to include fundraising in the description. That way, when everybody sees this, we put it out to the general public for consumption. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah. So my friends in Ukraine. All right. One of the very first students that I had, and I was learning more so than she was. I think it was with a combat medic course in Kiev, just around that June timeframe last year. Her name is Diana. Diana is the sweetest lady that you'll ever see. Uh, Maybe just a little bit younger than I am, but already a mother, and she was an elementary school teacher before she became a combat medic. So, really interesting. Also, she was the very first female in her new unit. So, obviously, that speaks volumes of her proficiency. She's good, and being the very first female in her unit must be a very stressful and overwhelming experience for her. So, I hope to see her, and I hope to get her back on one of the scenario based trainings that we were doing in June. I was supposed to be the unconscious victim, and I have an amputation and stuff. And what does she do? She literally tickles me in some of the breaks of training. When I'm supposed to be unconscious, I'm like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, you got one coming back. But I'm really looking forward to seeing her and see how she's doing today. But also recently, I had done a bit of fundraising for my friend Artem. Artem, a really high speed guy, really, really brilliant. I met him in April of last year. Just a tremendous individual, first and foremost. But he was very quick to ask for fundraising because several of the pieces of equipment that he had were the plain Jane basic stuff, and so it was really important to have not the basic stuff, much better quality things. And so I was able to raise quite a bit of money for him. And in fact, that took a lot of time out of my personal fundraising, and also, some of the other fundraising events that I've been trying to do for other friends. So Artem is one that I really get. I really hope that I have the opportunity to hug. A wonderful, wonderful man, like I said, now with good gear, and I know that he'll be in the thick of things very soon if he's not already. So yeah, looking forward to getting to hug him. As far as donations are difficult, and like I was mentioning earlier, I would much rather be shot at than have to stand on a street corner and try to solicit donations in that form or capacity. And which is this is so helpful, and thank you very much for that offer to provide that link in show notes, description, what have you, because the people that are watching this are the people that understand the necessity of need and the necessity to have those funds and fundraise. My goodness. So if you are listening to this, thank you so much. Link in the description. Hopefully you might even want to go check out Atlas Global Aid yourself. Atlas Global Aid has a good website, or at least a decent website, decent social media content. And that's something that I'll also be doing with Atlas Global Aid in Ukraine, is doing a bit more social media so that you can see what we're doing, how we're doing it. And of course, that is very difficult because we want to be safe first and foremost. I'm not going to, put a picture up if it's going to cost us our lives. So having that wherewithal and understanding of operational security, but also being able to share, the flex of how awesome we've been able to help the people that need that help. Man, that's what I'm really hoping to do. I don't want to boast necessarily, but by God, you bet, these scrawny little muscles are going to flex, and I'm going to be really proud of the work that we've done.
Well, that's fantastic. And having you on, Ron, and being able to share your future plans, your knowledge of the work that you're getting ready to go do. Again, I mentioned it in our first talk. The American people, Westerners in general, we keep hearing much about the word fatigue, and I think that when they run into a personality such as yours, knowledge such as yours, patriotism such as yours, the firm belief that you have in this cause, the way that you do, I think it gives them one more solid point of contact to know that there are good people that are putting their life, their limb, their treasure on the line for this. and they see it as a worthy cause. So you taking the time to do this with me, it means a lot, and I can't thank you enough. And all the volunteers that I run into, there's always a fundraising component to what they're doing. Generosity paves the way for a lot of these people. So if you've watched this and you've enjoyed the interview, the time we've had with Ron, again, visit the description below, take a look at the links. And as he mentioned, Atlas Global Aid, we'll have that posted as well. And we want to help Ron as much as we can. All the volunteers, they're very humble people. They don't like asking for money. So that's kind of our job here at the channel. And the more money that we can raise to keep them doing this good work, the more lives we're going to save, the sooner we can bring this war to an end, and the sooner you can be over your fatigue. That's a little bit of a joke. But having said that, this has been a broadcast from Murphy Media. I'm your host, Michael. We've been joined today by Ron Carter. And after that piece of station identification, we do want to wish Ron a belated birthday. Mine was the day before, so we are birthday buddies. So, right. Ron, I wish you a happy birthday, and we will get together as I put this up on YouTube, and we will get these links posted. Is there anything that we should know that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share? Any shout outs, any thank yous, any knowledge you want to drop on anybody?
Oh man, I wouldn't know where to begin because there's just so many people to shout out to. I've got to thank you though. Thank you so much. There's not a lot of people that are looking at Ukrainian volunteers or what's going on in Ukraine as far as Westerners trying to aid. So thank you so much. That's really, really wonderful, and hopefully it shares so much of the reality of Ukraine. So much of the public's understanding of Ukraine is simply, oh, more money going to Ukraine, and just ridiculousness that is superfluous to the real humanity that you could easily see if you were there yourself. So hopefully we are a good representation of the people of Ukraine. Our friends, they really are. I've been learning Ukrainian, by the way, and I'm not going to murder it by saying so much Ukrainian language right now, but my goodness gracious, there's so many beautiful, wonderful Ukrainians that have aided me not only in learning the language, but learning how everything goes on. So, I mean, there's no way on this earth that I could not mention how amazing Ukrainians are. Yeah, full stop. You, sir, are an absolute treasure. Thank you so much for what you're doing, Michael. Happy birthday to you. Man, I'll certainly raise a drink to you tonight because you're amazing, buddy. Thank you.
The honor is mine. The support that we've had, the community itself is so tight, so close knit. That online Instagram community, it's built on trust, and to have been allowed in that by people such as yourself, it's an honor to work for the cause in this small way. And I have to give a shout out to my fiance. She tolerates this. I'm currently using her tripod to hold this phone, so I don't have to hold it with my hand, so you don't have to look at my nostrils. So that's also thanks to her. But Ron, this is great. And one last thing, I have to give you credit. You introduced me to StreamYard. This has been a life-changing platform. That dreaded international lag is gone. We don't have to deal with it anymore. So that has been a plus. So thank you for that. But as I said, this has been a great conversation. And once you're in Ukraine, let's do this again. I know June 1st, you're looking at taking off. I know you mentioned Chicago. I am in Southern Illinois. Maybe we need to put our heads together. I might be able to come up there and run into you.
Man, that sounds like fun. Hopefully that would work out. That sounds great.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Ron, it's been a pleasure. And we will look forward to talking to you here again soon.
Thank you very much, Michael. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. You stay safe, and we will see you soon.
Sir.